Billionaire last dying wish to see the Black Maid. What happened changed everything. Welcome, my beautiful family. Today I shall be telling you a story that is precious for this world, a story meant just for family, and that's exactly what you are to me. A story that shows true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the lives we touch and the love we leave behind. This story proves that kindness outlives everything else. Gather your family and popcorn as we begin. The air in Arthur Sterling's penthouse suite, perched impossibly high above the city, smelled of old money and impending loss. Not the romanticized scent of antique wood or leather, but the sterile, almost medicinal aroma of expensive disinfectant and the cloying sweetness of lilies flown in from Holland, wilting delicately in crystal vases. Arthur lay in the center of it all, a skeletal monarch on a throne of Egyptian cotton and advanced medical technology. His breath, shallow and uneven, was amplified by the hushed reverence of the specialized nurses who flitted like silent specters. He was 92, and for the past 60 years, his name had been synonymous with power, acquisition, and an almost brutal efficiency that had built an empire of steel and finance. Now, that empire meant nothing. His eyes, once sharp enough to dissect balance sheets and the souls of men, were milky, fixed on a spot on the impossibly high ceiling, seeing something no one else could. His children, Richard and Elaine, moved through the periphery of his room like anxious satellites, orbiting the immense gravitational pull of his impending death. They spoke in whispers, not out of respect for their father's state, but out of a nervous anticipation for the will. Richard, stiff in his tailored suit, checked his watch every few minutes, a gesture of impatience he couldn't quite mask. Elaine, ever the dramatist, dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, her expressions more rehearsed than spontaneous. They were here for the inheritance, for the legacy written on paper, not the man fading to for them. Arthur knew it. He'd lived with that knowledge for decades, a silent, festering wound beneath the gilded surface of his life. He'd built an impenetrable fortress of wealth, only to find himself its sole, lonely prisoner. He closed his eyes, a flicker of something ancient and weary crossing his face, a silent lament for a life he'd lived but never truly felt. Miles away, in a part of the city the Sterling family wouldn't deign to visit, Lena Mae Johnson woke with the first blush of dawn. Her home was small, meticulously kept, filled with the scent of coffee and the faint, lingering warmth of freshly baked bread from yesterday. Her hands, gnarled with the honest work of 73 years, moved with a grace that belied their strength as she tended to her small window garden. A patch of basil, a vibrant red geranium, a struggling rosemary bush, each given the same gentle, unwavering care. Her life was a tapestry woven with routine and quiet dignity. She volunteered at the local community center, helped Mrs. Henderson with her groceries, and always had an encouraging word for the children who played noisy games outside her window. No one knew her as extraordinary, and she had never sought to be. Her wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the small acts of kindness she scattered like seeds in her neighborhood. She hummed a gospel tune, a low, melodic sound that filled her small kitchen with a warmth that no amount of sterile lilies could ever replicate. Yet beneath Lena Mae's calm exterior lay a reservoir of memories, some sweet, some tinged with a faint, almost forgotten sadness. She carried her past not as a burden, but as a part of her, shaping the quiet strength in her eyes. There were stories she'd never told, kindnesses she'd given that were never acknowledged, and a life she'd lived on the fringes of a world so different from her own. She finished her coffee, washed the cup, and glanced at the old photograph on her fridge, a faded image of a younger Lena Mae, smiling, holding a small, fair-haired child. A silent sigh escaped her lips, a wisp of a memory that drifted away as she turned to face the day. Back in the penthouse, a tremor ran through Arthur's frail body. The monitor beside his bed emitted a sharp, urgent beep. The nurses sprang into action, their hushed efficiency giving way to a frantic flurry of movements. Richard and Elaine exchanged nervous glances, the weight of their father's mortality finally pressing down on their avarice. "Father?" Richard whispered, a rare note of genuine concern in his voice, though it was quickly overshadowed by the fear of losing control over the inevitable. Arthur's eyes fluttered open, searching, pleading. His lips moved, a soundless whisper at first, then gaining a desperate, raspy strength. The words were barely audible, a fragile whisper against the roar of his dying moments. But they pierced the sterile silence of the room like a shattering crystal. "Lena! Lena May!" Richard frowned, leaning closer, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Lena who, father? What are you saying?" Elaine, ever practical, interjected, "Is he asking for a nurse? Did someone new start today?" But the nurses shook their heads, their faces grave. This wasn't a medical request. This was something deeper, more personal. Arthur's eyes, filled with a desperate urgency, locked onto Richard's. He repeated the name, his voice a dying plea, a raw, exposed nerve in the grand, controlled symphony of his life. "My maid, Lena May. I need to see her, now." The words hung in the air, heavy and incongruous. A billionaire, on his deathbed, surrounded by his heirs and medical marvels, asking for his maid? The absurdity of it was almost comical, yet the intensity in Arthur's eyes was anything but. Richard and Elaine exchanged a look of utter bewilderment, their minds racing to make sense of this bizarre 11th-hour request. They couldn't know that this whispered name, this desperate dying wish, was not an end, but the beginning of an upheaval that would unravel their carefully constructed world. What do you think prompted Arthur Sterling's final wish to see Lena May? Share your theories in the comments below. The phone call reached Lena May's modest kitchen as she was peeling potatoes for her lunch. It was Richard Sterling, his voice tight with an unfamiliar blend of command and perplexity. "Miss Johnson," he began, bypassing any pleasantries, "this is Richard Sterling. My father, Arthur Sterling, he's asking for you. He's not doing well. It's his dying wish to see you." Lena May paused, the potato peeler suspended in midair. The name, Arthur Sterling, felt like a relic from a distant past, a whisper across a chasm of decades. Her heart gave a slow, deliberate thud, a resonance that echoed deeper than the news itself. "Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice calm, though a flicker of something unreadable crossed her features. "I haven't worked for your father in many, many years." Richard bristled. "Yes, I'm aware. But he's insistent. He keeps repeating your name. Look, I don't understand it either, but the doctors say, well, it could be any moment now. Can you come?" His tone suggested a grudging obligation, not genuine concern for his father's emotional state. A profound weariness settled over Lena May. She imagined the sterile, imposing mansion, the cold grandeur she remembered from so long ago. What could Arthur Sterling possibly want with her now, at the very end? Part of her wanted to refuse, to stay in the comforting familiarity of her own life, untouched by the echoes of a distant past. But then she pictured a flicker of those once vibrant eyes, now dimmed, asking for her. A quiet sense of duty, a memory of a time when kindness was a necessity, stirred within her. "I'll come," she said, her voice soft but firm. The drive to the Sterling estate was a journey not just through city streets, but through time. Each familiar turn, each wrought iron gate that loomed larger than memory, pulled her deeper into a past she'd long since packed away in the quiet corners of her mind. When the taxi finally pulled up to the imposing front entrance, the sheer scale of the mansion still managed to take her breath away. It was a fortress of wealth, unchanging and indifferent to the human drama unfolding within its walls. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with a palpable tension. Richard met her at the door, his gaze scrutinizing, dismissive. Elaine, perched on an antique settee, barely spared her a glance, her phone clutched in her hand. The air hummed with unspoken questions, with suspicion, and with the faint, unsettling scent of finality. Lena May felt their eyes on her, assessing, judging, trying to place her within their carefully constructed world. She was an anomaly, an unwelcome variable in their carefully managed grief. "This way, Miss Johnson," Richard said, leading her down a long, echoing hallway lined with ancestral portraits that seemed to stare down at her with silent judgment. Each step Lena May took was deliberate, her posture erect, her dignity a shield against their unspoken hostility. She had walked these halls before, but then she'd been invisible, a shadow moving between grand rooms, tending to duties no one else wanted. Now she was an unwelcome spotlight. The door to Arthur Sterling's bedroom stood ajar. A low hum of medical machinery was the first sound that greeted her. Then the overwhelming smell of lilies, cloying and heavy, hit her. Inside, the room was a tableau of stark contrasts: the dying man, the anxious children, the silent nurses, and the vast, oppressive wealth that seemed to mock the fragility of life. Arthur lay almost motionless, his face a roadmap of age and suffering, his skin translucent against the crisp white sheets. His chest barely rose and fell. Richard approached the bed. "Father," he said, his voice strangely flat, "Miss Johnson is here, Lena May." At the sound of her name, a profound, almost imperceptible tremor ran through Arthur's body. His eyelids, heavy with the weight of impending death, fluttered open. Slowly, painfully, his eyes found Lena May. She stood just inside the doorway, a quiet figure in a simple, dark dress, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. For a long, agonizing moment their eyes locked. It was as if the sterile, hushed room, the anxious family, and the insistent beeping of machines all faded into oblivion. There was only the gaze, a silent conversation unfolding across decades. Arthur's eyes, though clouded by age and illness, held a startling intensity. Lena May saw not the titan of industry, the man who had commanded fortunes, but a flicker of someone else. Regret, yes, but also a deep, aching vulnerability, a desperate plea for something she couldn't yet name. And beneath it all, a fragile, almost unbearable recognition. A lifetime of unspoken words, of quiet observances, of shared moments buried deep in the past, seemed to flood into that single profound glance. Her own heart, which had been so steady, gave a lurch. She saw his suffering, not just physical, but a profound spiritual ache. And in his gaze a flash of memory. A young, vibrant Arthur, lost and broken after a tragedy. A kindness she had offered then, a moment of shared humanity. It was all there, in the silent language of their eyes. Arthur's lips parted. He didn't speak her name this time. Instead, a single tear, heavy with unshed emotion, tracked a slow, deliberate path down his temple, disappearing into the white hair at his ear. It was a tear for what was lost, for what was left unsaid, for what might have been. It was a tear for her. Elaine gasped, a soft, disbelieving sound. Richard stared, his face a mask of confusion. They had never seen their father cry, not in his entire adult life. He was unyielding, emotionless. But now, in his final moments, a single tear had escaped, and it was for the maid. This was not the dignified, controlled exit they had anticipated. This was raw, messy, and entirely unexpected. The moment landed like a bomb in the sterile quiet. It exposed a hidden fissure in the polished facade of the Sterling family, a secret chamber in Arthur's heart that none of them knew existed. For Lena May, it was a confirmation of something she'd long since buried, a connection more profound than any job title or social barrier could ever define. In that single tear, in that silent, understanding gaze, everything they thought they knew about Arthur Sterling, about Lena May Johnson, and about the very nature of wealth and human connection began to change. What hidden history do you think connects Arthur and Lena May, and how do you feel about Arthur's single tear? Share your thoughts below. Your insights help us understand the true heart of this story.
The fragile moment, charged with unspoken history, shattered as suddenly as it had formed. Richard, always the pragmatist, was the first to break the spell. His jaw tightened. "Father," he said, his voice laced with an edge of barely contained frustration, "what is this? Do you need to tell us something about Miss Johnson?" His gaze flickered to Lena May, openly suspicious. He saw not a woman with a shared past, but a potential complication, a threat to the carefully orchestrated narrative of his father's legacy. Elaine, recovering from her initial shock, straightened her silk scarf. "Honestly, Richard," she whispered, but loud enough for Lena May to hear, "this is highly irregular. A maid? At a time like this? What could she possibly have to do with anything important?" Her tone was dripping with disdain, instantly re-establishing the invisible, yet impenetrable wall between their worlds. Lena May felt the familiar sting of being an outsider, an intruder. The air in the opulent room grew heavy with their judgment, their unspoken accusations. She shifted her weight, a subtle tremor running through her. She had come out of a sense of duty, a flicker of compassion for a dying man, not to be subjected to this thinly veiled hostility. She looked at Arthur, whose eyes had once again closed, his breathing shallow, as if the effort of that single tear had exhausted his last reserves of energy. He was unreachable again. I should go," Lena May said softly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the machines. She took a step back, needing to escape the suffocating weight of their suspicion. There was no place for her here, not in this sterile mausoleum of wealth and familial tension.
Richard stepped forward, blocking her path, his posture radiating authority. "Not so fast, Miss Johnson. My father specifically asked for you. We need to understand why. Is there something you're not telling us? Some arrangement?" He let the word hang in the air, loaded with insinuation. He imagined a secret will, a hidden trust, a quiet scam waiting to be unveiled. His father, in his dotage, perhaps manipulated. It was the only explanation that made sense in his world. Lena May met his gaze, her own eyes steady. "There's nothing to tell, Mr. Sterling. I worked for your father many years ago. I left. That is all." Her refusal to elaborate only fueled Richard's suspicions. Her quiet dignity was, to him, a shield for deception. "That is not all," Elaine chimed in, stepping closer, her voice sharp. "My father is a billionaire. People have always tried to take advantage. We just want to ensure that no one misinterprets his final moments." The accusation was clear. They thought she was after something, money perhaps, a piece of the sterling pie. The thought was so far removed from her true intentions that it almost made Lena May smile, a bitter, weary smile. She had spent her life giving, not taking. The idea of coveting their cold, isolating wealth was alien to her. A nurse, sensing the escalating tension, stepped between them. "Mr. Sterling needs quiet. Please, Mr. Sterling, this isn't helping." Richard glared at Lena May. "We'll discuss this later, Miss Johnson. For now, you will remain here. My father asked for you. Until we understand, you're not leaving." It wasn't a request, it was an order, delivered with the absolute certainty of a man used to getting his way. He even signaled to a security guard, who subtly moved closer to the bedroom door, an unspoken deterrent. Lena May felt a surge of indignation, hot and quick. She, Lena May Johnson, being held against her will in the Sterling mansion? It was preposterous. But then she looked at the frail figure on the bed. His life was ebbing away, and he had reached out for her. The memory of that tear, that profound, wordless connection, held her captive more effectively than any security guard. She had always answered a call for help, a need for comfort.
Could she turn her back now, even in the face of their scorn? She swallowed her pride, a practiced skill from a lifetime of navigating others' assumptions. "Very well," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil within. She wouldn't argue, not now, not when a man was dying. But she wouldn't be broken either. Richard, mollified by her apparent compliance, ordered a nurse to set up a cot in a small, out-of-the-way room for Lena May, a gesture meant to convey her place in the hierarchy, far from the main family quarters. He then retreated with Elaine to the study, their voices low and urgent, undoubtedly discussing Lena May and the implications of her unexpected presence. The tension in the house escalated, moving from the personal to the strategic. Lena May found herself alone in the small windowless room, the cot surprisingly comfortable. She sat on its edge, listening to the muffled sounds of the mansion, the distant clinking of dishes, the hushed voices. She felt a profound loneliness, a sense of being utterly out of place. This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. Yet a stubborn sense of loyalty, an echo of a forgotten promise, kept her rooted. She thought of Arthur, not the billionaire, but the younger man she remembered, the one whose grief had been so raw, so debilitating. The man who had, for a brief time, allowed her a glimpse into his vulnerable soul. What had he done with his life since then? Had all this wealth truly brought him happiness? The emptiness in his eyes had suggested otherwise. She thought of her own life, filled with quiet purpose and genuine connection. It was a stark contrast to the cold, isolated existence she saw within these walls. Lena May closed her eyes, trying to find her center, to remember why she had come. It wasn't for them. It was for him. For the flicker of humanity she had seen in his dying gaze. For the untold story that was now, finally, ready to be heard. The resistance of the family was a hurdle, but the unspoken plea of Arthur, however faint, was a stronger force, binding her to this place, at least for now. She knew, deep in her bones, that something profound had happened, and that this was only the beginning. The Sterling family is clearly resistant to Lena May's presence. What do you think Lena May's quiet strength means in the face of their suspicion and hostility? Share your thoughts on her resilience in the comments. The following days settled into an uneasy truce, a silent standoff under the Sterling roof. Arthur remained in a delicate, fluctuating state, sometimes lucid for a few minutes, more often lost in a haze of pain and medication.
Lena May, relegated to her small room, found herself in a strange, limbo-like existence. Richard had indeed arranged for security to discreetly monitor her movements, a fact she noted with a weary shake of her head. She was a guest, a prisoner, and a puzzle piece all at once. Despite the family's efforts to keep her isolated, circumstances began to bind them together, subtly at first. The full-time nurses were exhausted, working in shifts, and Lena May, with her quiet composure and natural empathy, found herself drawn into the orbit of Arthur's care. She would sit by his bedside during the late hours, when the family had retreated to their own wings of the mansion, when the house finally exhaled its tension. She didn't speak much, just held his frail hand or gently wiped his brow with a cool cloth. There was a quiet strength in her presence that seemed to soothe him, more so than any expensive sedative. Richard and Elaine, though still wary, couldn't ignore the change. Arthur, notoriously restless and prone to agitation in his fading moments, seemed calmer when Lena May was in the room. His breathing became more even, his facial muscles relaxed. One evening, Richard walked in to find Lena May softly humming a spiritual, a melody that filled the opulent room with an unexpected, profound peace. Arthur's eyes were closed, but a faint, peaceful smile played on his lips. Richard felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name, not jealousy, but a stark awareness of his own inadequacy, his inability to bring his father such comfort. He found himself observing Lena May, She moved through the mansion with a quiet grace, occasionally helping the nurses, sometimes just sitting in the vast empty library reading a worn paperback. She never asked for anything, never complained. Her very presence was a silent challenge to their assumptions. She ate her meals alone, simple fare compared to the gourmet offerings for the family, but always with a quiet gratitude. Her composure was unsettling, for it lacked the desperation Richard expected from someone in her position. One afternoon, a significant storm hit the city, plunging the mansion into darkness. The generator kicked on, but for a few tense minutes, the entire estate was without power. Fear flickered in Elaine's eyes, a rare crack in her polished facade. The nurses rushed to check Arthur's life support, their voices tight. Lena May, however, remained calm. She lit a battery-powered lantern she had brought with her, a small, practical item, and placed it on Arthur's bedside table, its warm glow cutting through the gloom. When the power returned, she was simply there, a steady, reassuring presence. That evening, over a strained dinner, Richard tentatively addressed Lena May. "Miss Johnson," he began, his voice less accusatory, more hesitant, I appreciate your help with my father. He seems more at peace when you are near." The words were difficult for him, a concession he hadn't thought he'd ever make. Lena May simply nodded, acknowledging his words without seeking praise. "He is a man in need of comfort, Mr. Sterling." "Memory," Elaine scoffed, still trying to reclaim control of the narrative. "What memory? He rarely spoke of his past, especially before Mother died. He was all about the future, about business." Lena May's gaze, steady and knowing, met Elaine's. "Some memories are held in the heart, Mr. Sterling, not spoken aloud." Her words hung in the air, a gentle rebuke that carried more weight than any shouted argument. It was a subtle assertion of her own perspective, a quiet reminder that their father's life, like all lives, had layers they couldn't fathom. The forced proximity, the shared vulnerability of Arthur's dying days, slowly began to chip away at the rigid social barriers. Richard, to his own surprise, found himself seeking Lena May's subtle advice on how to keep his father comfortable, asking about his preferences, things he realized he had never truly known. He started bringing her a cup of tea in the evenings, a small gesture that spoke volumes. He still harbored suspicions, but they were now mixed with a growing sense of curiosity and a grudging respect. One night, Arthur was particularly restless, groaning softly in his sleep. Lena May, who was sitting by his bedside, began to hum the same spiritual melody she had hummed earlier. Arthur stirred, his hand reaching out, grasping Lena May's. His eyes, though still closed, seemed to relax further. Richard, who had just entered the room, stopped dead in his tracks. He watched the scene unfold, an intimate moment he felt he was intruding upon. He saw the genuine, unburdened affection in Lena May's touch, the silent communion between the dying man and the woman he had inexplicably called for.
In that moment, a profound truth began to surface for Richard. This wasn't about money or manipulation. This was about something deeper, something far more fundamental than the cold calculations of wealth and inheritance. It was about a bond, forged in a time he couldn't recall, a connection that transcended their vast societal divide. The forced proximity had not only brought Lena May physically closer, but had also begun to open the Sterling's eyes to a different kind of wealth, one measured not in assets, but in the quiet, enduring power of human connection. The mansion, for the first time in a very long time, felt less like a fortress and more like a space where genuine human emotions, however inconvenient, were beginning to breathe. How is the forced proximity between Lena May and the Sterling family changing their perceptions of each other? What subtle signs indicate a shift in their understanding? Share your observations in the comments. The subtle shifts in the mansion's atmosphere deepened as Arthur's final days became clearer. He was fading, but in those moments of startling lucidity, his eyes would fix on Lena May with an almost desperate urgency. Richard, his initial skepticism slowly eroding, found himself actively trying to piece together the puzzle of his father's past, driven by a gnawing feeling that he was missing something. Elaine, however, clung to her cynicism, convinced that Lena May was still a calculated player in some elaborate endgame. One afternoon, Richard noticed his father struggling with a framed photograph on his bedside table, his weak fingers fumbling with it. It was a picture of a young woman, fair-haired and radiant, standing beside a younger, smiling Arthur. Richard knew it was his first wife, Clara, who had died tragically young, before he was born. Arthur had rarely spoken of her, his grief a locked vault. "Father," Richard murmured, taking the frame gently from his father's trembling hands. "Clara." Arthur's eyes, wide and surprisingly clear, met Lena May's. She helped me," he whispered, his voice raspy yet potent with memory. "When I thought I would break." Lena May nodded, a soft, understanding look in her eyes. "She did, Mr. Sterling. She saw you. Truly." Later that day, feeling an inexplicable pull, Richard began to search through his father's vast, seldom visited personal library. A room filled with first editions and leather-bound volumes, but devoid of personal artifacts. He was looking for anything, old letters, journals, anything that might shed light on his father's mysterious connection to Lena May. He dismissed the idea of a secret affair. His father was too rigid, too proud for that. No, this felt different, more profound than illicit romance. Hidden behind a false back in an old mahogany desk, he found it. A worn, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, filled with his father's elegant, albeit emotional, handwriting. He hesitated, feeling like an intruder, but the desperation in his father's eyes, the quiet dignity of Lena May, urged him on. The journal began abruptly, detailing the darkest period of Arthur Sterling's life, the sudden, devastating loss of Clara. October 14th, 1968. The light has gone out. The world is gray. I am adrift in an ocean of grief, utterly alone. The empire I built means nothing. Every breath is a struggle. My heart is shattered, irreparably broken. Richard read on, his own breath catching in his throat. He saw a side of his father he had never known, a man consumed by despair, on the brink of self-destruction. The entries grew darker, more nihilistic, reflecting a mind teetering on the edge. Then, around page 37, Lena May's name appeared, not as a maid, but as a presence. November 2nd. The new maid, Lena May, came today. Quiet woman, doesn't hover, doesn't pity, just does her work. Her silence is a balm. I see the pity in everyone else's eyes, not hers. The entries slowly shifted. Lena May wasn't just cleaning the house, she was quietly, steadily holding Arthur's world together. November 15th. Couldn't eat. She brought me broth. Didn't ask if I was hungry, just placed it there. Left. It was the first thing I've kept down in days. A small kindness. December 1st. Found me in Clara's study, staring at her portrait. She didn't say anything. Just placed a hand on my shoulder, firm but gentle. No pity, only understanding. She looked at me like I was a human being, not a broken statue. I haven't felt that in weeks. December 20th. She found Clara's favorite tea set packed away, cleaned it herself, made me a cup of tea. It tasted like Clara, like home. She remembers things about Clara that I'd forgotten in my grief. She talks about her not in hushed tones, but with genuine fondness. It's like Clara lives in her memories too. It hurts, but it's a good hurt.
Richard's eyes blurred. His father, the cold, distant man he knew, had been saved by the quiet compassion of a young maid. Lena May had not just cleaned his house, she had cleaned his soul, slowly and patiently dusting off the layers of grief until he could breathe again. She had reminded him of kindness, of humanity, and of his own wife, Clara, in a way his own family, blinded by their expectations, never could. As Richard continued reading, he discovered the true depth of Lena May's impact. She didn't pry, she didn't sermonize, she simply existed, a steadfast anchor in his father's storm. She shared stories of her own simple life, offering a grounded perspective that slowly pulled Arthur back from the abyss. She reminded him that even in loss, life continued, that small acts of grace could heal. She helped him rediscover purpose, not in accumulating wealth, but in simply living. The journal entries revealed that Lena May had become a quiet confidant, a compassionate presence who understood his pain without needing to speak. She was the only one who truly saw the man beneath the billionaire. He turned to the last entry related to her, March 10, 1969. Lena May is leaving. Her sister is unwell, needs her in Georgia. I offered her more money, a house, anything. She just smiled that quiet smile and said, "My sister needs me more, Mr. Sterling. And you're going to be all right now." She saw me whole again when no one else could. How do I ever repay such a debt? This quiet woman saved me from myself. I will never forget her. Richard closed the journal, his hands trembling. The mystery intensified, but not in the way he had imagined. This wasn't a hidden affair or a plot for money. This was a story of profound, life-altering gratitude, a debt of the soul. He looked up to see Lena May standing in the doorway, her presence quiet and unassuming. "You found it," she said, her voice soft but with an echo of recognition. She hadn't needed to explain. She knew. Richard could only nod, his voice caught in his throat. He had spent his life thinking his father was invincible, a force of nature. Now he saw the vulnerable man who had been saved by the unseen kindness of a young maid. The connection between his father and Lena May was not just real, it was the most real thing in Arthur Sterling's life. His entire worldview, his understanding of his father, of wealth, and of human value, shattered and rearranged itself in that single, devastating yet illuminating moment. What emotions do you think Richard is experiencing after reading his father's journal and realizing the true depth of Lena May's impact? How does this revelation change the story for you? Share your thoughts below. The revelation of the journal changed everything. Richard, usually so guarded and cynical, felt a profound shift within him. The carefully constructed image of his unyielding father had crumbled, replaced by the portrait of a man brought to the brink by grief, and then, slowly, patiently, pulled back by the quiet compassion of Lena May. His gaze towards Lena May was no longer suspicious, but filled with a dawning respect, even awe. He saw not a maid, but a savior, a guardian of his father's forgotten humanity. Elaine, however, remained untouched by the truth. Richard had tried to share the journal with her, to explain, but she had dismissed it as sentimental nonsense and a symptom of their father's eccentricity. She couldn't conceive of a relationship that wasn't transactional, that wasn't rooted in status or money. Her resistance solidified, creating a new rift in the family. Despite Elaine's continued coldness, the atmosphere in Arthur's sick room softened. Richard, now understanding the true nature of their bond, actively encouraged Lena May to spend time with his father. He would often find them in quiet communion, Lena May holding Arthur's hand, sometimes softly singing one of her spirituals. Arthur, in turn, would often drift off to sleep with a peaceful expression, a serenity he hadn't known in decades. One evening, Arthur, surprisingly lucid, opened his eyes and looked at Lena May. "Lena May," he whispered, his voice thin but clear. I should have done more. For you." Lena May gently squeezed his hand. "You gave me the chance to help a soul in pain, Mr. Sterling. That was gift enough." Her eyes held no trace of resentment, only a deep, abiding understanding. "You saved me," Arthur insisted, a tear finally escaping the corner of his eye, not of sorrow, but of profound gratitude. When I thought I was gone, you pulled me back." Lena May smiled, a soft, tender smile that illuminated her aged face. "You were strong, Mr. Sterling. I just reminded you of it." She then recounted a small, forgotten anecdote from that difficult time, a time when Arthur, consumed by grief, had accidentally spilled tea on an important document, and Lena May, instead of chastising him, had simply cleaned it up, then gently told him a funny story about her own clumsy brother, making him laugh for the first time in weeks. Arthur's eyes, though weak, sparkled with the memory. He chuckled softly, a sound that hadn't been heard in that room for decades. It was a fragile but real bond forming, not a new one, but a deep, powerful reconnection with a past that had been buried under layers of wealth and regret. There was a moment of profound peace, a sense of safety that had eluded Arthur for years. Richard, witnessing these exchanges from the doorway, felt a profound ache in his own chest. He had spent his life chasing his father's approval, only to realize his father's heart had been saved, nurtured, and truly seen by a woman he had dismissed as invisible. He saw the true cost of his father's ambition, the emotional void that all the money in the world couldn't fill. He also saw Lena May's unwavering integrity, her quiet strength. He started to see his father not as a monolithic figure, but as a man who had loved deeply, grieved profoundly, and been rescued by an act of pure, selfless kindness. One afternoon, Richard sat beside Lena May in the garden, a quiet defiance of Elaine's disapproval. "Mr. Johnson," he began, his voice hesitant, I want to thank you for my father and for opening my eyes." He spoke of the journal, of the father he was only now truly getting to know. Lena May listened patiently, her hands resting in her lap. "Mr. Richard," she replied, her voice gentle, "your father was a good man, beneath all the layers he built around himself. He just needed someone to remember that for him, for a while." They shared stories then, Lena May speaking of her own humble upbringing, her family, the challenges and joys of her community. Richard found himself captivated, listening to a life story so utterly different from his own, yet rich with a deep, authentic happiness. He spoke, for the first time, of his own struggles to live up to his father's immense legacy, of the pressure, the loneliness that came with being an heir. It was a moment of unexpected vulnerability, a bridge forming between their disparate worlds. A fragile but real bond began to form between them two, founded on a shared concern for Arthur and a newfound understanding of each other's humanity. Humor, memory, and an unexpected kindness added a light to the mansion that had been absent for far too long. It felt like healing was possible, not just for Arthur, but for the fractured Sterling family itself. Lena May, once an unwelcome interloper, had become an unexpected balm, a quiet catalyst for truth and reconciliation. For a few precious days, the air in the Sterling mansion felt lighter, imbued with the warmth of genuine connection. It was a fleeting peace, a delicate bloom in the shadow of impending loss, but it felt real. What do you think is the significance of Richard's newfound understanding of Lena May and his father? How might this newfound bond be challenged in the future? Share your predictions in the comments. The fragile peace that had settled over the Sterling mansion was shattered as abruptly as a dropped crystal vase. It began with the arrival of Arthur's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man as precise and unyielding as the legal documents he carried. The family gathered in the opulent drawing room, Lena May noticeably absent, relegated to her smaller quarters by Richard, who instinctively felt the impending storm. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the room. As per Mr. Sterling's instructions, a recent amendment to his will must be read immediately. Richard and Elaine exchanged a look of apprehension. Arthur's original will had been meticulously planned, leaving the vast majority of his estate to his children and various philanthropic endeavors. An amendment at this late stage was unsettling. Mr. Henderson began to read.
After the usual bequests and charitable donations, he paused, his gaze settling on Richard. And finally, he announced, his voice devoid of emotion, Arthur Sterling, in consideration of services rendered and a lifelong debt of gratitude, bequeaths to Lena May Johnson the entirety of his primary residence, the Sterling Mansion, along with a substantial trust fund to ensure its upkeep and her financial security for life. A stunned silence descended upon the room, thick and suffocating. Elaine's gasp was the first sound to pierce it, sharp and disbelieving. Richard's face, usually so composed, contorted in a mixture of shock and disbelief. The Sterling Mansion? Their ancestral home? Given to the maid?
"This is an outrage!" Elaine shrieked, leaping to her feet, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "It's preposterous! She's manipulated him, an old, dying man, susceptible to influence." Her eyes blazed with a fury that transformed her elegant features into a mask of pure venom. Richard, though reeling, tried to remain calm. "Mr. Henderson, are you certain this is legitimate? My father was not always coherent in his final days." "The amendment was made 3 weeks ago, Mr. Sterling, witnessed by 2 independent parties and myself, all present when your father was fully lucid and of sound mind," the lawyer stated, his voice firm. "He was very clear about his intentions." Elaine turned on Richard, her anger redirecting. "This is your fault, Richard, bringing her back here. You saw her with him. You let her weave her spell. She knew what she was doing, playing the quiet, dignified servant, charming our ailing father." The accusations were like daggers, slicing through the fragile understanding Richard had painstakingly built with Lena May. In that moment of overwhelming shock and betrayal, his carefully constructed rationality fractured. He had seen the journal, yes, but the sheer magnitude of this bequest twisted the narrative. Could it be true? Had she, despite her quiet demeanor, been subtly manipulating his vulnerable father? The cynical, suspicious Richard resurfaced, battling the nascent respect he had developed. Just then, Lena May, drawn by the raised voices, appeared in the doorway, her face etched with concern. She had overheard parts of the announcement, her heart sinking with each word. Elaine's eyes, wild with rage, fixed on Lena May. "There she is, the calculating gold digger. Come to gloat, have you? You insidious serpent, you played him, didn't you? You saw his vulnerability, saw your chance, and you took everything." Lena May recoiled as if physically struck. The raw hatred in Elaine's voice, the venom in her words, was a shock more profound than any physical blow. "Miss Sterling, I never asked for anything. I didn't even know." "Don't lie!" Elaine screamed, advancing on Lena May, her finger jabbing accusingly. "You came back here because he called you. You knew he was dying. You knew he was weak. You preyed on him." Richard, still wrestling with his own internal turmoil, didn't intervene, his silence a crushing betrayal. He looked at Lena May, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a silent question that ripped through her. Had he truly believed in her, or was his newfound respect merely a temporary reprieve from his default suspicion? The accusations, the scale of the bequest, the sudden reversal of fortune, it was all too much. The delicate bond between them, so recently forged, seemed to shatter under the weight of it all. "I only came because he asked," Lena May whispered, her voice trembling, her dignity warring with her pain. "I only wanted to give him comfort." "Comfort? Or a mansion?" Elaine sneered, her voice dripping with scorn. "You disgust me. Get out! Get out of my house!" Lena May looked from the furious Elaine to the conflicted, silent Richard, whose gaze was now averted. The pain of his doubt was almost unbearable. She had walked back into this house out of compassion, out of a quiet sense of duty, and now she was being crucified for it. The years of quiet service, the profound act of saving a grieving man's soul, it all amounted to nothing in the face of greed and suspicion. With a profound sense of anguish, Lena May turned and walked away, her shoulders slumped, her spirit momentarily crushed. She had come to offer peace, and instead she had brought chaos and accusation. The bond she shared with Arthur, the solace she had provided, was now twisted into something ugly and manipulative. As she retreated, she heard Elaine's furious voice echoing behind her. "She's not getting a dime! We'll fight this! We'll fight her until she has nothing!" Lena May locked herself in her small room, tears finally streaming down her face. She had never sought wealth, never craved luxury. All she had ever wanted was respect and to live a life of quiet purpose. Now even that was being stripped away, her integrity questioned, her kindness weaponized. The lowest emotional point of the story had arrived. She questioned if she was ever worthy of connection, if her life of unseen kindness had truly made any difference, or if it had just made her a target. The Sterling mansion, once a place of hesitant bonding, now felt like a cage, its opulent walls closing in, suffocating her with the venom of a family tearing itself apart. The will's revelation has created a massive shatterpoint. What do you think Lena May is feeling in this moment? And what do you think Richard's inaction signifies? Share your thoughts on this dramatic turning point in the comments. May spent the next 2 days in a self-imposed exile within the mansion's small guest room, a prisoner of circumstance and the Sterling family's vitriol. Her heart was a raw, aching wound. The accusations from Elaine, Richard's damning silence, had cut deeper than any words had a right to. She replayed the scene over and over, the fury in Elaine's eyes, the doubt in Richard's, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal. She had offered kindness and in return had been branded a manipulative opportunist. She considered leaving, just walking out and never looking back. But then she thought of Arthur, frail and fading, his last conscious acts a desperate plea for her presence. Could she truly abandon him now, even if his family had abandoned her? Meanwhile, in the grander parts of the mansion, chaos reigned. Elaine had immediately contacted her own lawyers, declaring war on the amended will. She was convinced Lena May had charmed their father, taking advantage of his vulnerability. Richard, however, was in a torment of his own making. The initial shock had given way to a profound sense of shame. He reread his father's journal, the words a stark counterpoint to Elaine's accusations. "She saved me from myself. I will never forget her." His father's gratitude was clear, undeniable. The sheer generosity of the bequest, while staggering, was consistent with a man who felt he owed Lena May his very life. He thought of the moments he had witnessed, Lena's quiet vigil, the way Arthur's breathing eased when she was near, the genuine solace she brought. He remembered his own dawning respect, the tentative bond they had started to form. He had seen her integrity, her quiet strength. How could he have doubted her, even for a moment? His silence during Elaine's outburst now felt like a lead weight in his gut, a profound failure. He had let his sister's greed and prejudice overshadow the truth he had discovered, the truth his dying father had entrusted him with. Richard looked at the opulent room around him, the symbols of his family's wealth. It felt hollow, tainted by the ugliness that had erupted. He remembered Lena's small, warm home, filled with quiet purpose and genuine connection. What was true wealth? His father's last wish, his desperate plea for Lena, now seemed a profound statement, a final judgment on a life lived for accumulation. His father wasn't giving Lena a house, he was giving her a public acknowledgement of the invaluable, unpayable debt he owed her. He was rectifying a lifetime of unsaid gratitude. The choice now lay stark before Richard. Uphold his family's pride, protect their inheritance, and denounce Lena May. Or stand by the truth he had uncovered, the truth of his father's heart, and champion a woman who had given selfless kindness. It was a choice between his family's ingrained prejudice and his own nascent conscience. He envisioned his father's peaceful face when Lena May hummed, and the raw despair in his journal entries before she came into his life. The answer became terrifyingly clear. He sought out the lawyer, who confirmed the absolute legality and Arthur's unwavering intent regarding the amendment.
"Your father was not confused, Mr. Sterling," the lawyer reiterated. "He was resolute. He made it clear that this was not a whim, but a long-considered act of profound appreciation. His father wasn't giving Lena a house. He was giving her a public acknowledgement of the invaluable, unpayable debt he owed her. He was rectifying a lifetime of unsaid gratitude." The choice now lay stark before Richard. Uphold his family's pride, protect their inheritance, and denounce Lena May, or stand by the truth he had uncovered, the truth of his father's heart, and champion a woman who had given selfless kindness. It was a choice between his family's ingrained prejudice and his own nascent conscience. He envisioned his father's peaceful face when Lena May hummed, and the raw despair in his journal entries before she came into his life. The answer became terrifyingly clear. He sought out the lawyer, who confirmed the absolute legality and Arthur's unwavering intent regarding the amendment. "Your father was not confused, Mr. Sterling," the lawyer reiterated. "He was resolute. He made it clear that this was not a whim, but a long-considered act of profound appreciation."
Richard returned to his father's room, where Arthur lay barely conscious but still breathing. Lena May wasn't there. He felt a desperate urgency. He knew what he had to do, even if it meant alienating his sister, even if it meant a public battle. His father deserved this final act of grace, and Lena May deserved justice. He walked down the long corridor, his steps resolute, towards Lena May's small room. He knocked softly. No answer. He tried again, a little louder. "Miss Johnson? Lena May? It's Richard. Please, I need to speak with you." A long moment of silence passed. He was about to turn away, a knot of despair tightening in his chest, when the door slowly creaked open. Lena May stood there, her eyes red-rimmed, but her posture still holding an indomitable dignity. Richard's gaze met hers. The accusation, the hurt, the weariness in her eyes was almost too much to bear. "Lena May," he began, his voice rough with emotion, I am so profoundly sorry. For everything Elaine said. For my silence. I was wrong. We were all wrong." He swallowed, humbled. "My father, he wasn't manipulated. He was grateful, profoundly grateful. He owes you more than a mansion. He owes you his life." He extended his hand, not in an offer of assistance, but in a plea for connection, for forgiveness. "Please," he said, his voice earnest, "my father needs you, and I need you to know that I believe you. I see you. I finally understand." Lena May looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face, searching for sincerity. She saw remorse, genuine regret, and a dawning understanding. She saw a man, for the first time, truly grappling with his own errors. Her own choice was now laid bare: cling to her hurt and leave, or choose compassion, forgiveness, and return to the dying man who had reached for her. The silence in the hallway stretched, tense and heavy with unspoken decisions. It was a silent internal battle for Lena May, a reckoning with a lifetime of slights and the profound call of a dying man's gratitude. Richard has made his choice and reached out to Lena May. What do you think Lena May's decision will be, and how do you think it will impact Arthur's final moments? Share your predictions for the resolution in the comments. The silence in the hallway stretched, pregnant with Lena May's decision. She looked at Richard's outstretched hand, not a gesture of charity, but of genuine apology and desperate plea. She saw the raw vulnerability in his eyes, a stark contrast to the guarded, arrogant man she had encountered days earlier. He wasn't just asking her to come back for his father. He was asking for forgiveness, for a chance to set things right. Her heart, though bruised, was not broken. A lifetime of quiet faith and unwavering kindness had taught her the power of forgiveness, the necessity of grace. She thought of Arthur, lying alone, clinging to life, his last conscious acts a beacon directed at her. She thought of the young, shattered man she had once pulled back from the brink. He deserved peace. Richard, too, deserved a chance at redemption.
Slowly, Lena May reached out and took Richard's hand. Her grip was firm, reassuring. "Mr. Richard," she said, her voice soft but steady, "it takes a lot for a man to admit he was wrong. I appreciate that." She didn't offer platitudes or easy absolution, but a quiet acceptance that spoke volumes. "Let's go see your father."
A wave of relief washed over Richard, visible in the slumping of his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hand. He led her back to Arthur's room, a newfound reverence in his step. The mansion, once cold and oppressive, now felt like a place where a profound truth was about to unfold. As they entered Arthur's room, Elaine was there, her face still etched with anger, though muted now by the undeniable reality of her father's imminent death. She glared at Lena May, but her usual outburst died on her lips as Richard stepped forward, his voice calm and firm. "Elaine," he said, his gaze unwavering, "Father's will is final, and his reasons are clear. Lena May, she saved his life after Mother died. She pulled him back when he was lost in grief. He never forgot. This isn't manipulation, it's gratitude." He briefly explained the contents of the journal, his voice carrying an authority Elaine rarely heard. "We will honor his wishes, and we will treat Lena May with the respect she deserves." Elaine bristled, her mouth opening to retort, but the sight of Arthur, his breathing growing even shallower, stopped her. The reality of death finally overshadowed her greed. She sank back into a chair, defeated but not entirely convinced, her anger still simmering beneath the surface. Lena May walked to Arthur's bedside. He lay still, his eyes closed, his face peaceful. She gently took his hand, her thumb stroking his frail skin. His eyes fluttered open, slow and tired, but still holding that familiar flicker of recognition when they found hers. "Lena May," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. A soft, contented sigh escaped his lips. "I'm here, Mr. Sterling," she murmured, her voice filled with tenderness. "I'm here." She began to hum her spiritual again, the same melody that had brought him peace decades ago, the same one that had calmed him in the recent days. It filled the room, a balm against the sterile hum of machines, a beautiful, soulful sound that transcended the opulent surroundings. Arthur's grip on her hand tightened, a faint, almost imperceptible squeeze. He looked at her, then at Richard, who stood by her side, a silent sentinel. A faint smile touched Arthur's lips, a smile of profound peace, of a debt finally acknowledged, a life finally understood. In that moment, Arthur Sterling drew his last breath. He passed not alone in his vast wealth, but surrounded by the quiet comfort of the woman who had truly seen him, and the son who had finally understood. The room filled with a profound silence, deeper than any that had come before. Richard, tears streaming down his face, placed a hand on Lena May's shoulder, a gesture of shared grief and newfound respect. Elaine, though not as visibly moved, watched the scene, a seed of doubt finally planted in her cynical heart. The true wealth of their father's life, it seemed, was not the empire he had built, but the unseen kindness he had received, and the quiet love he had chosen to acknowledge in his final act. In the days that followed, the Sterling family honored Arthur's final wishes. The fight Elaine had threatened never materialized. Richard, transformed by the experience, became Lena May's staunch defender and ally. He worked tirelessly to ensure the smooth transfer of the mansion and the trust fund, even moving some of his own funds to help establish a new community center in Lena May's old neighborhood, a silent tribute to her life of service. Elaine, witnessing Richard's unwavering conviction and the outpouring of quiet support for Lena May from the community, slowly began to soften, her prejudice chipping away, revealing a grudging respect beneath. Lena May chose to keep the Sterling mansion, transforming some of its vast, unused rooms into spaces for art classes and literacy programs for the neighborhood children, breathing new life into the old walls. She created a legacy of kindness within the very symbol of Arthur's wealth, echoing the premise that true wealth is measured in the lives we touch.
She became a quiet matriarch, not of a fortune, but of a thriving community. Her dignity and grace an enduring testament to the power of unseen kindness. Years later, Richard often visited Lena May at the mansion, now a vibrant hub of activity. He would find her in the conservatory, tending to a small rosebush, a direct descendant of one Clara had loved. The mansion, once a monument to a solitary man, had become a testament to human connection, to unexpected love, and to the profound truth that kindness outlives everything else. Lena May, once the invisible maid, was now its heart, a living embodiment of Arthur Sterling's last, most meaningful wish, and the quiet triumph of a life well lived. What is your biggest takeaway from Arthur and Lena May's story? How has your perspective on wealth and human connection changed? Share your final thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart.